I was already an old man when I realized that time had taken more from me than my strength. It had stolen my courage to face the shadows of my past. For decades, I carried a quiet weight of regrets I never spoke about, moments I wished I could rewrite, and a silence that grew heavier with every passing year. That afternoon, as the sun spilled softly through my window, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was age, or maybe it was finally understanding that the past cannot be changed. Yet one question remained. Could I truly forgive myself? I've spent most of my life believing that forgiveness was something we earned from others, not something we could offer ourselves. But as the years settled onto my shoulders, I began to understand how wrong I'd been. Life has a way of teaching us gently at first, and then all at once. The memories I avoided for so long began returning in quiet waves, moments of youth, of impatience, of choices made too quickly, and among them, the one decision that shaped the man I became. Before I tell you that story, I want to welcome you here, to this quiet corner where memories breathe. If you're listening, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your age and the city you're watching from in the comments. It helps this little community of ours grow, and it lets me know who's walking this path of reflection with me. I was 17 when the world felt too wide for my own good. At that age, I thought time was something that bent to my will. I believed every road would wait for me. Every opportunity would return if I missed it. And every person I loved would somehow understand the storms inside me. Looking back now, I see how foolish that was. Youth has a way of convincing us that consequences are distant things, reserved for older men with tired eyes. I never imagined I would become one of them. The day that shaped everything began like any other in our small town. It was late autumn, and the mornings carried that familiar chill that crept under your collar. I remember my mother calling my name from the kitchen, her voice warm, steady, always grounding me. But I didn't answer. I had other plans, impulsive plans, the kind that only a teenager could believe made sense. My father wanted me to help him repair the old fence behind the house. It had stood there longer than I'd been alive, leaning a little more each season. But that morning, I felt restless. A friend had promised an adventure on the far side of town, something trivial, something reckless, something that felt bigger than responsibility. So instead of staying, instead of helping, I grabbed my jacket and slipped out before my father noticed. As I walked down the long dirt road, I glanced back once, just once, and there he was, my father, standing by the fence with his tools resting at his feet. He wasn't angry. He wasn't calling after me. He just watched, quietly, with a look I didn't understand then. A look I would spend a lifetime replaying. I didn't know that it would be one of the last times I'd ever see him standing strong. I didn't know that choosing to leave that morning would become the decision that echoed through every year that followed. I didn't know how heavy a single moment could become when carried for decades. But regret, I learned, is patient. It waits, it grows, and it follows you, even into old age, whispering the same question over and over. What if you had stayed? For years, I tried to convince myself that my leaving that morning had meant nothing, that my father would have fixed the fence alone, just as he had repaired so many things in our home. He was a quiet man, patient in ways that still humble me now. But patience doesn't shield a person from the wear of time, nor from the weight of a world that keeps moving, even when a heart grows tired. Not long after that morning, something about him began to change. He moved slower, breathed heavier, rested more. At first, I thought he was simply tired from the season's work. Every man his age felt the strain of winter approaching. But my mother sensed more. I remember coming home one evening and finding her sitting at the table with her hands clasped tightly, as if holding on to something she feared would slip away. "He's not himself," she said softly. "He's been pushing too hard." The guilt stirred even then, but I buried it. 17-year-olds aren't built to confront fear. They outrun it, and I did that well too well. I spent more time with friends, took longer routes home, found excuses to avoid the heavy silence that now lingered in our house. One afternoon, I finally found him resting in his chair near the window, the one where he used to polish his tools or tie small knots, just to keep his hands busy. This time, his hands were still. His eyes were on the old fence, the same one I had walked away from. I sat beside him, unsure of what to say. Words felt clumsy, foreign. He broke the silence first. "You know," he murmured, "that fence has stood through storms stronger than any of us." I forced a smile, not understanding. Then he added, "But it could have used your hands." It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't anger. It was something far heavier, truth, spoken without blame, but with a quiet sadness that settled deep in my chest. In that moment, I realized he hadn't needed my strength. He had needed my presence. And that was the moment I failed him. The kind of failure that doesn't shout, the kind that whispers, for a lifetime. The weeks that followed felt heavier than any season I had lived through. My father's strength continued to fade, not all at once, but like a candle slowly running out of wick. Some days he was himself quietly humming as he sharpened a tool, or stepping outside to breathe the cool morning air. Other days, he barely rose from his chair, his gaze drifting across moments only he could see. I remember one evening when the sky turned the color of old copper and the scent of rain lingered in the air. I sat beside him again, determined to stay longer this time. He didn't look at me, but I could feel his breathing deep, deliberate, as though each inhale was a decision. "Do you ever think about the things you didn't do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, but it was a tired smile, worn thin by years. "All the time," he replied. "But I try not to let them become heavier than what I did do." I didn't understand the weight of those words until much later. At 17, regret was something imaginary, a distant echo meant for older men. I didn't realize I was sitting beside one who carried his own quiet burdens. The day his health took a sharp turn came suddenly. My mother rushed into my room at dawn, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard. We rode to the hospital in silence, the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. When we arrived, they placed him in a room filled with machines that blinked and hummed a far cry from the gentle stillness of his chair by the window. I stood by his bedside, unable to shake the memory of that morning I had abandoned him. It replayed in my mind with painful clarity, his tools at his feet, the fence leaning, his eyes following me as I walked away. Time slows in moments like that. It stretches and bends, forcing you to face truths you've avoided. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. I wanted to promise him I'd have stayed if I had known. But youth rarely sees the cost of its own freedom. And sometimes the apology comes too late to be spoken aloud. Hospitals have a strange way of making time feel both urgent and unbearably slow. The steady beeping of the monitors, the muted footsteps in the hallway, the faint scent of disinfectant, all of it becomes a backdrop to moments you wish you could postpone forever. I sat beside my father, holding a hand that once felt so sure, so capable. Now it felt fragile, like something the world had worn thin. He opened his eyes briefly, long enough to recognize me. "You're here," he murmured, as though it surprised him. "I should have been here sooner," I whispered. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he closed his eyes again, and for a moment I feared that was the last time I'd hear his voice. But then he spoke softly, carefully, choosing each word with the precision of a man who knew he didn't have many left. "Life isn't measured by the days we get right," he said, "but by the ones we try to fix." It was the closest thing to absolution he ever gave me, not because he didn't forgive me, but because he had never held anything against me to begin with. That realization hurt more than blame ever could. Pierre drifted in and out of sleep, each breath shallower than the last. The nurses came and went, murmuring kindly, adjusting blankets, checking numbers I didn't understand. My mother sat on the other side of the bed, her fingers tangled in his, her lips moving in a prayer she had whispered for decades. Near sunset, his breathing changed slower, strained, as though he was weighing whether to take another. I leaned close, desperate, hoping for one more moment, one more sentence, one more chance. He didn't give me words, he gave me a look. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but I knew it. It was the same look he had given me that morning by the fence, the quiet understanding, the gentle sadness, the acceptance of who I was then and who I had not yet become. And then he was gone. The room didn't react. The machines continued their rhythm. The world outside kept moving, but something inside me collapsed. All the apologies I had saved for one day died with him, and in their place, regret settled deep, patient and unyielding. In the weeks after my father passed, the house felt quieter than I ever remembered. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that follows you from room to room, waiting for you to sit still long enough to face it. My mother moved carefully through her days, tending to small tasks with the same tenderness she once used to guide me through childhood. I tried to help, but grief makes clumsy hands out of capable ones. One afternoon, while sorting through my father's things, I found his old toolbox, the same one he carried the morning I had run off. The metal was scratched and worn, the handle wrapped with a strip of leather he'd replaced himself. Inside, everything was arranged neatly, exactly the way he liked it. And there, beneath a stack of nails and weathered cloths, I found something unexpected, a folded piece of paper. My name was written on it. The handwriting was crooked, as if written on a day when his strength was already slipping. My hands trembled as I opened it. I never needed your help with the fence. I only wanted your company. One day you'll understand the weight of that. There was no reproach, no disappointment, just truth, gentle, human, painfully simple. I closed the letter and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a doorway opening toward it. Regret had shaped so much of my life, carving its lines across the years like a slow-moving river. But for the first time, I wondered if I could choose a different current. As I stood by the fence he once tended alone, I ran my hand along the rough wood. The boards had aged, but they still stood leaning, stubborn, unfinished. I picked up one of his old tools and tightened a loose nail, then another and another, not to mend what had broken between us, but to honor what still remained. The wind carried the smell of autumn, the same scent from that morning long ago. For the first time in decades, it no longer stung. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It softens its edges. It teaches you to walk with what you cannot change. And in that softening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt him near. In the years that followed, I learned to visit my memories the way one visits an old friend, gently, with patience, without expecting them to change. The fence eventually collapsed, as all things do, but the lesson my father left behind remained standing. I carried his letter with me through every season of my life, unfolding it whenever the weight of the past threatened to harden my heart again. Forgiving myself didn't happen in a single moment. It came slowly, in the quiet spaces between ordinary days while tying my shoes, brewing morning coffee, or watching the sun stretch over the horizon. I began to understand that regret is not a punishment, but a reminder of the love we wish we had expressed. And love, once understood, has a way of easing even the oldest wounds. Now, as an old man, I know this. Peace is not given, it is chosen. And on the day I finally forgave myself, I chose to carry my father's memory with grace instead of sorrow. If this story touched you in any way, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. There are many more memories to share, and I'd be honored to have you walking this path with me.